Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us over your lunch hour today for our monthly Business Growth Luncheon. For those who are unfamiliar with our Business Growth Luncheon, it is offered every month and it is in partnership with the NSBA and EDR. Each month, we cover a variety of topics or tailored to help you in your small business. Today, we have Linda Allen Ardesty, who is the president of the Allen Ardesty Leadership Group. Linda will be presenting on leadership during the pandemic. If you have any questions as we go through the presentation, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A box, not the regular chat box. However, do feel free to use the regular chat box to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your business. As always, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. You'll receive an email around this time tomorrow with the link to the recording. With that, I'll pass it over to you, Linda, to now begin the presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Lola. Yes, it's really great to be with all of you over lunch hour today. Okay, Lola, my great partner, can you see my screen okay?
Yes, your screen is nice and clear.
Okay, awesome. That's great. Excellent. Okay. Great. Well, this was the description that was provided, and I'm going to be asking all of you a question here right away in the poll box coming up about what motivated you to participate in this webinar today. Leaders have changed because they really had to. And going into the second year of this pandemic, my observation is that leaders of all levels from all industries have had to strengthen their leadership muscles through a lot of ups and downs of walking shoulder to shoulder with your teams, your supplier, your customers during what I hope is a once in a career event. In this webinar today, I'm going to share with you the things that I've observed with the different leaders that I have worked with from various industries over this past year. I've coached 40 leaders, excuse me, and I chaired 8 CEO peer group meetings. I taught 6 leadership development programs and facilitated 4 programs for Queens University, where I was able to work with leaders from all across Canada. And I'm going to share with you some of those insights with some suggestions that you can take away to continue what you've been doing so well to thrive in your business. So there will be a few polling questions here coming up at the beginning, and then again later on in the presentation, and then some Q&A and comments. It would be great to bring some of the experiences and learning from all of you together in this room today for the next hour, so we can all walk away having learned something from each other. And I'll offer you a takeaway or two at the end of the webinar so you can continue thinking about what we talked about today and use it going forward. So a little bit about who I am and where I'm coming from in today's presentation. Live here in Regina, and my office is located on Treaty 4 land. Treaty 4 is the traditional territory of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and homeland of the Métis. So from my territory to where you are, I welcome you today. So I've been born in Regina. My husband and I have lived here our whole lives. We are owned by 2 Irish Wolfhounds, and for any of you who have dogs, you may say the same for yourself. I'm an aunt, very active with different activities here in Regina. And I'm also a member of the board of trustees for the Mackenzie Art Gallery. And the picture in the background is the last vacation trip that we had overseas before the pandemic hit. So I'm sure everyone remembers where they last were before we had to come home and stay put here in Canada. I was on the public sector leadership path until 12 years ago, and that's when I turned into an entrepreneur. I founded my private practice company right now, and I work with other subcontractors and consultants and coaches of like mind in what I provide to different organizations. By profession or by trade, I'm an org development professional and a credentialed executive coach. And what I do in my practice is I'm dedicated to supporting leaders' personal growth and that of their organizations. It's my mission, my value in how I do what I do. So I work with the public and the private sector, with leaders and their teams, with C-suite to various levels of leadership, and with entrepreneurs. And since 2010, I have coached over 200 leaders and have 25 hours of coaching. I've facilitated and developed and designed 40 strategic plans. The leadership development programs in total that I've delivered is 15. I've chaired over 30 peer advisory group meetings for Tech Canada. And I've delivered 6 OD programs, org development programs for Queens University. And I've published 5 articles in total, including for Forbes Coaches Council. The first for me that I'm really proud of and really carry the responsibility with me as well is I was the Red Shoe Award winner in 2018 with Tech Canada, and the first woman in the company's 30-year history to receive that award. So that's a big deal to me. And for Queens University, I've been a lead facilitator in the org development program now for 2 years, and the first person from Saskatchewan to hold a role like that at Queens University. So great to work with people all across Canada. And in my presentation today, this is really important for you to know. These are my observations and my insights of patterns that I've noticed in leaders during the pandemic. Confidentiality is paramount. You will not know who this was. If there's anyone here on the call who chooses to talk about that in the chat box, you certainly can. But these are my observations. And overall, what I'm about to roll in here with you is that the success from our leaders was definitely the result of leadership and learning. Lockstep. Everyone went as a learner and a leader lockstep over the last 14 months to produce the results that they got. So first polling question, I know Lola's going to bring this up on the screen here shortly. Would like to know, and I'd like you to share so you see who chose to be in this room and why, what made you decide to attend this webinar, and click all that apply. The title really hit the mark for you. How leaders have changed in the pandemic. I'm just here to learn. Perhaps you just want a few takeaways. Perhaps you're looking for inspiration and motivation, or you're just here to take some time out of the day for you or other. Just curious. So if you can fill that in and click all that apply. What made you decide to attend today? And Lola will share the results of this shortly. Awesome. Just here to learn, pick up a few takeaways. Inspiration, motivation, excellent. Cool. Okay, well, let's make sure we do that. The next question for you, the second polling question before we roll in, I want to know who's in the room. So once again, check all that apply. Are you in a leadership role? You're the CEO or the owner, or you're vice president or a different role. You're not in a formal leadership role, but you're interested, potentially. You're a solopreneur. And in that case, the people for which you lead are probably your suppliers, like your accountant or your IT provider, just in terms of how you're working with your clients or your peers across your industry. So you would still have that, or you're in a private company, or you're in a large organization, whether it's public or not-for-profit or other. So click all that's apply. Let's see who's in the room today. Okay, so mainly, a third of you, leadership role. Almost a quarter of you are solopreneurs, and then we have some people in different organizations. Okay, excellent. So keep that in mind as we do more polls and Q&A at the end, because that's quite a group of people that you'll be able to learn from and communicate with. This is a format I'm going to share my insights and observations with you in the 130 leaders across Canada that I had the opportunity to either work really closely with on a bi-weekly or monthly level, or over a 3 or 4 day period for training. So over that year, we're going to talk in terms of business results, team interactions, and inner work. So for business results, this would be ensuring that the results are linked to behaviors that you need from yourselves and others, the goals and the critical processes that were used in your business to get there. I'm going to share the top 3. Team interactions in order to get those business results. How did leaders have to work effectively with others? And what were some of the ineffective patterns that they needed to change or work through in order to get those business results? I'll share with you the top 3. And then the inner work, the strengthening your stamina to meet the relationship needs of those business results. Essentially being able to put on your oxygen mask first before you can be of service to others, to get the team to interact and for you to interact the way you need them to get those business results. So the top 3 from each area, and then the top 10, the number 1 observation that I had, and I've got a little bit of a twist if I'm going to ask you to weigh in on that too. So keep that in mind, that will be coming up as well. So the first of 3 business results in how leaders really work during this time, I call this the beginning. They faked it until they made it. And be honest with yourself. You probably did too. In fact, some of you might think you still are doing it, but that is a critical, new, legitimate process now. We need to have a good muscle to fake it until we've made it. We can't wait until we've made it and we've got it all cased and we're strong. We got to roll with it and we really got to fake it here. It's completely okay. I think this has really enabled leaders in some cases for the first time to fail in front of other people, to not know, to make a call or a decision last April that in May they realized didn't work or they had to change again. So faking it until you made it, that's a legit muscle now more than ever. Very, very solid right now. The second thing for business results, the observational share, is kind of in the middle. We got through the beginning, and then the middle, kind of like Q2, Q3 of last year, I really noticed leaders were doubling down on their core business, but they played around with how they delivered it. And they also dared to imagine when this is over, whatever that means. For some people, they each had their own definition onto that, but we are getting ready to pounce and we are going to be ready. And I see this a lot in the private sector that I worked with. They went as hard as they could at doing what they were really good at and that core business and what people needed, but they really got creative in how they delivered it. And I think one industry that we could really look to that as customers we are most intimately familiar with would be people in the restaurant and hospitality sector. So think about how they doubled down on their core business and how they adapted and provided it in different ways to do that. So this is really a significant one, a huge one. And I think a lot of leaders are still really living there. The third observation I noticed in terms of business results, leaders really did punch into new markets, new services, and new programs, and took that leap of trust to know what they didn't know about going into the unknown. That's a lot of knowns and unknowns, but they really did this. And I really did see this within the public sector as well, in terms of how they communicated with their clients or their stakeholders. One example would be our provincial government created a new training program called Reopen Saskatchewan and put some parameters around how businesses and organizations could get the training grant in order to receive 4 months of training to help their workforce and themselves align to the government of Saskatchewan's Reopen Saskatchewan plan and get everybody ready. If you think about that, that government organization, that particular ministry came up with the parameters of the program, their own process to do it, and pretty timely got it out there and made it work for people. So this is something that we really noticed an awful lot. There's different industries that would really engage and communicate with their customers a lot. That didn't stop, but how they did it shifted. So a lot of people in industries where they would get feedback and engage from their clients or stakeholders to find out what was really needed quickly moved to virtual and the Zoom format in order to do that. And they didn't quit, and they added new things. Really used poll or used Jamboard, Google Jamboard, to really engage people in those conversations when they're working virtually. But this really happened a lot. And there's a lot of these new markets and services that a lot of leaders do not plan to stop offering once the pandemic is over, we get back to some sense of normalcy. They're not planning to stop doing it. In fact, they're going to keep it as an option. And I think you yourself may have done that already, or you could think of what it was like to be a customer or a user of a service who did that. So that leap of faith into knowing what they didn't know will continue to go on. So those are the results and what the goals that I noticed that business leaders are really focused on. They faked it until they made it. They double down on their core business and they're pounce ready. When different health orders lift and we can get back to some interaction, they are totally ready for that. And the third thing I noticed was a real common trend is they broke into some new markets and they really took a leap. And some of those services are staying. So they didn't do that by themselves. There was a lot of ways that they worked with their team. And this would be the one place where I really started to notice most of the difference. That was the reason why they were able to make some of those changes in the business. And here's the first one. Work from home. That's an acronym, WFH. We all know what that means now. I don't think that's going away, but work from home and trust. Leaders really had to build a new muscle in how to strengthen trust with their employees and their customers. In some cases, a complete rebuild of trust with their employees, depending on what the relationships were like before and after. And what I noticed is leaders really led this conversation, but they also followed. There were many leaders who had conversation with their employees about how are we going to work now? What's most important? What do you need from me? Tell me what you need. How can I help you do that? And I really do feel they both led and they followed in getting to where we are now. In fact, this was so paramount that I published an article with Queens University, and I put the link on the screen there for you about how to strengthen our work from home reality and really grow that muscle. And there's a tool in there that might be really useful to you as well, regardless of the size of your team. How your team operates and your team vision has changed whether you intentionally did it or not. So take a step back and figure out, what do we need to start doing? What do we need to stop doing? And what should we continue to do because it's working? There are different things that people have really started to figure out in terms of even how we stay in contact with each other now that so many are working from home. And there are a lot of leaders that I'm working with where their employees are in a hybrid model. Some are back on site and some are virtual. And so now they're needing to create and start new ways of working together, communicating and building relationships in ways they've never really had to before. I was with a client yesterday and we were talking about how great it was to just to do the walk by, to walk by someone's office through their door, talk to them. And we don't get to do that anymore. So how do we create a virtual walk by? How do we create the chats that we used to have when we would leave the workplace, walk together, chit-chatting to get to our cars in the parking lot to go home? There are different ways that you can recreate that for your team to have that walk back to the car. So that was a real strong team interaction, and some of the patterns that leaders had to learn and admit and make when they made some mistakes and try to really enhance that. Someone else I know realized that with a lot of our parents who have young kids at home and parents that, had to be at home when their kids were doing online school. That created whole new conversations with the workplace that never really were had before, and how to then still meet the needs of your customer who may still want to come in on site to your business, and yet be able to support all your staff to work from home. Some creative solutions came in how organizations did that. The second observation that I have in terms of how leaders really adapted and changed their team interaction was around decision making. And decision making wins, I'm saying, at high velocity because they had to. Some leaders were in decision making conversations that realizing we're making a decision. And it's really took me back to this model and this article from Harvard Business Review in 2020 about what you don't know about making decisions. Making decisions is a process, it's a journey. Sometimes when leaders think it's just a one-time event, we'll make the decision, we'll implement the outcome, good to go. Not the case. Really good decision making is not a one-time event. It's a process, a bit of a journey to get to that better type of decision. And advocacy and inquiry are two different types of approaches for decision making. There could be a need for either one at any given time, but here's what I noticed. In any organization who did a lot of advocacy type ways to make decisions. So it was a contest potentially between 2 or 3 people. Here's what we should do. No, here's what we should do. I'm going to advocate for my idea. The purpose of the discussion was to persuade, to lobby, to sell your point. You were the spokesperson for that idea. The pattern of behavior that just really tended to take fold was you were really just, your role was to persuade other people, defend your position, and not at all look weak or vulnerable. Anything that wasn't the majority perspective was not really thought of well, and the outcome was a winner or a loser. That's it. With the inquiry way to make decisions, collaborative problem solving. And we have conversations to test and evaluate before we make a decision, to free people up to let's just talk, let's just brainstorm, let's evaluate everything. And then in 45 minutes, we'll all make a decision together. So to free people up, thinking that if they don't do something, the decision opportunity is gone, park it for the end of the hour, talk about it. It turns everybody from a spokesperson for an idea to being a true critical thinker. The patterns of behavior that really start to come forward is you present and consider both sides of an argument. You're always open to alternatives because decision making comes later in the agenda. And you really accept constructive criticism because you're not there to own your idea. You're there to hear your idea and that of others. And you really cultivate and value perspectives that aren't the majority. So as a leader, to be able to say, Monica, haven't heard much from you as we've looked at these 4 options. What do you think? What are we missing here? So really being open and inviting to think about that. And then the outcome becomes more collective. Inquiry is more time consuming on the front end, but because it gets to a better result, there's more buy-in, there's less going back, there's less workarounds, there's less people trying to sabotage the outcome. And I think what's really interesting about this is any leader who may have tended more to be more advocacy and kind of let those conversations go on had no choice at times but to be more collaborative and to take that stance of inquiry and being curious before they made a decision. So, the DM really took more of a collaborative approach. This would be a really big one, which is why some of those business results really got to where they got to. And the third point around team interaction that I want to share, I'm calling this conflict and patience. So leaders really had to embrace conflict, whether they were comfortable with it or not, because it happened all the time. And they had to embrace that. I saw leaders really work to develop this. And not only were they more patient with themselves, but leaders were more patient with members of their team who were working on things. And I think I always go back to the character that Eugene Levy played, Johnny Rose. If any of you are familiar with Schitt's Creek, and if you're not, it's a really relaxing, great, such an awesome series to watch. And there's a lot of leadership lessons that come out of these characters. And Johnny Rose never rescued his family. If you remember, uh, that was just not a stance that he ever took. He was he let members of his family, his team, struggle a little bit, and the learning that came out of that was amazing. So that did take a little bit of embracing conflict, being patient, and a lot of learning comes from struggle. He was self-confident enough to surround himself with strong-minded people. I noticed a lot of leaders did that a lot, and more than they ever really thought they needed to do that before. People really did reach outside of their inner circle to really watch and learn with others. And I think participation in webinars like this not only happened to get new ideas, but it happened because leaders were really craving some learning and some interaction. And I did notice that leaders had an enhanced readiness to take responsibility for decisions and to take responsibility when things didn't work out. And they actually helped their team do that as well. And if we look at it from a customer perspective, we've now created forgiveness. If we got it wrong, even customers were a little bit understanding and forgiving. So I think in how businesses responded, it also created a little bit of loyalty. But we all entered into a period of conflict is okay, and let's be patient, very much so. And there is a sense of forgiving in here. So those would be the top 3 ways of working effectively with their teams that I think leaders really used, and some of them had to adopt some of these new behaviors because the patterns before weren't working. So the work from home new muscle, sometimes leaders led, many times they followed to understand and create what this reality could be. Decision making really shifted to become more collaborative. And conflict and patience, don't be afraid to channel your inner Johnny Rose at times if you feel yourself wanting to do something different, and think of how we interacted with people. So the team interactions got there because there was a lot of inner work that leaders did, some heavy lifting that was done in order to work differently and better with their team and to be on track to get those business results. The connection between these 3 factors is really critical. So the first observation I'll share with you is I really found that leaders of all levels of all industry gave themselves some recognition of emotional intelligence or emotional quotient EQ, the ups and downs that come from our emotional effectiveness. And there were a lot of ups and downs in themselves and what they observed in others. What was used more than ever before in my observation was empathy. Leaders really spent a lot of time thinking about 2 different types of empathy. One is cognitive, so spending a lot of time thinking of where is that person coming from on my team? What ideas do they have? What perspective are they coming from? What can I learn from that? Help me understand. So cognitive empathy, taking the time and using the right questions to really seek to understand and appreciate the perspective that someone else might be coming through. And the other type of empathy was emotional empathy. Leaders really, some were better than others and some started to use this quicker than others, but I'm noticing everybody more than ever putting themselves in someone else's shoes. How is that person feeling? Really trying to be curious about what's going on for that other person emotionally, and really seeking to understand and appreciate wherever that may be. And I think this is becoming even more paramount now that the mental health and wellness impact that this past year has had on people, we're feeling it now. We're going to feel it even more in the next 18 months, 2 years. I don't even think we've scratched the surface of the impact this is going to have. So I notice leaders are really relaxing a little bit about solving everybody's problems and just being curious to use empathy to understand where they're coming from. I did notice leaders really strengthen their stress tolerance, muscle, or emotional intelligence a lot. Um, Not stress avoidance, but stress tolerance, especially if they had a leadership coach or were in a peer advisory group, um, or really had a business partner or someone that they could really talk openly with and figure out how we're going to handle that. So they didn't avoid stress, they just really learned how to tolerate that and strengthen the muscle. Where I did see a hit for emotionally effective leadership would be in the area of self regard and confidence. That took a big hit. And for those of you here who are running your own business or are in a leadership role, uh, I would suspect that you would probably agree that whether it's at the beginning, the middle, or now, this hit a little bit harder, and there was a lot of self doubt happening. And I think people in leadership roles, regardless of what industry you're in, they all went through this journey in their own way, and it was a big one. So their confidence did take a hit. And what I've noticed now is a lot of leaders are um, giving themselves a pat on the back of the damn good job they did to get to today. And if you haven't done that yet, I encourage you to do that and boost your self confidence. What were the three things that you did such a great job with that you're so proud of yourself for doing? Write it down, celebrate it, really mark it. That is really important to do. And I also noticed that once leaders started to build up their confidence again internally, they became more directive. And there are times where employees and customers don't want to be engaged anymore, consulted. Just give me structure, make a decision. So you're the employer, you're the leader, be it. Make a decision, set the course. So finding a little bit more balance between when do I collaborate and engage, and when is it time or when does it make more sense for me to say, here's where we're going. So understanding the gray that can happen and the fine tuning between that. So empathy and optimism were important for leadership today, and I think even more now. Optimism isn't on the screen here, but that's another one that was really high. Whether they felt it internally or not, a lot of leaders gave the outward perspective that despite the setbacks that this pandemic is giving us, we're going to get through to this. And I think that optimism really served them well. The second inner work observation that I had that leaders used a lot and maybe more, so for some, this was a bit of a change. They tried out vulnerability and it worked. So vulnerability, being able to take a stand on something, make a decision, and say something, knowing that you have no control of what the reaction of other people are going to be, and you're going to do it anyway. That happened more often than I think leaders even realized. Even having to make different work arrangements with their employees, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, when physical work sites weren't so set up for social distance at first. There was some tough conversations that had to be had, and I think leaders learned they became vulnerable without even thinking about it. And Brené Brown, of course, is the true leader in all of this work. She has a few new podcasts on Spotify already. She's been very active during the pandemic. There's so much on social media about that. And I think this quote is really, really critical. Vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up when you can't control the outcome. I don't know what would be more of not control of the outcome than the situation we're in right now. And I do believe that this was one of the silver linings of the pandemic. And I think for some people, it redefined what vulnerability is, and it redefined what it could do for them. And I think they're role modeling that all right, a lot. Not being afraid of knowing yourself and making a mistake, not only with your employees, but with your spouse, with their significant other, with their kids. Um, we bring our whole selves to work, and leaders are whole people. And I think in all aspects of their life, there were moments of vulnerability. And this quote by Doris Kearns Goodwin, who I saw present a couple years ago, is really relevant to this. She said that really strong characteristics of leaders or leaders who can transform an ambition for themselves to an ambition for others. And this is the silver lining of being vulnerable and what that did for people. And the third observation around that inner work is self-efficacy without question came so strong and prominent in people's lives every day. I'm not even sure if they realized it. And just to ground us all in what's meant by self-efficacy, it's a person's particular set of beliefs that determine how well one can execute on a plan of action in any given situation. And to put it in more simple terms, self-efficacy is a person's belief in their own ability to succeed in a particular situation. So I'd said earlier that I think leaders also realize there are times that they can over collaborate, over consult, over engage. And there are times where if that skews the expectations or if it's unclear, they need to actually make it clear and give more structure. I do believe people want structure and crave structure. I think leaders really learned how to control any unproductive emotion that they were having. I think it goes back to the self-efficacy that they started to grow in their ability, their knowledge in themselves, that they're going to have the ability to do this. And when self-confidence took a hit, this is where the upside was they really started to build a little bit more strength here. And leaders understood that changing times requires a change of course. And my goodness, how many times did things change? The health protocols, how you social distance, what's open, what's not, what can we expect, what can't we not expect. That, if we weren't comfortable with that, we might as well get comfortable with the fact that it's going to happen now. I think leaders also learned how to communicate better with people, and they did it more with stories, with scenarios, with curiosity. I think that really increased because leaders' self-efficacy, the ability, the belief in their own ability to do this really increased too. And a good reason why, and I've got this in the background of this slide, is leaders who found time and scheduled it to replenish, to re-energize, and to think, to give themselves moments of relaxation, whatever that is, were able to build stronger self-efficacy and got through this better. And I think we'll be the ones poised to really carry through what the next couple years could look like. And I don't want to say it, but if this happens again, I think people are going to be a little bit more ready to hit the ground running on what needs to do. The question and the curiosity that I have is, what if leaders could have believed in themselves sooner to set this direction, a plan of action? What if? Could we have been more ready for that? So I've shared with you the inner work, recognition of emotional effectiveness, emotional quotient, ups and downs. Struggle is real and the upside is real. Vulnerability, it worked. And self-efficacy without question was stronger and grew. And I think if you haven't already given yourself that pat on the back or something that says, I rocked it, this was great, please take the time to do that if you haven't done it already. And if you have, encourage someone else to do it. Because I'm not sure everyone's given themselves permission to really take that. So this really always links together. Business results, team interactions, and inner work. Start with understanding the business result you need, the team interactions that you're going to need to get there, And what's that inner work you need to do for yourself to make this happen? You can imagine these three factors like a three-legged stool. If one of them is broken, it's not going to work. Quite often, leaders think of one or two of these, but rarely keep their eye on all three. So here's where I'm going to ask all of you a question now. I've shared my top 9 insights, and the top number 1 is the one I want to ask all of you about right now. So get ready to jump into a polling question here in a few slides. So the number 1, the top 10 insight that I observed about how leaders changed and how they've really become epic and better. It was a common thread through the 9 factors I just shared with you. Return on investment proven. I know it because I saw it and heard it myself with the leaders I worked with. I know the results they've achieved. And these insights would have not have happened without this one aspect. So think about it. And here's my question for you. And Lola will put a chat. Actually, you can jump into the chat box, not a poll. My curiosity is, what do you think this top 10 thing was? What is this insight? And it's not really a guessing game because you don't know what I've got coming up on the next slide, but I'm most curious on what you observed in these 9 aspects. What do you think was a common thread between them? What do you think was the difference maker? Why these 9 things worked? So I'm just curious, your observation based on what I just presented, what do you think the top 10 factor was that wove through this? Or your suggestion of what do you think that was? And Lola, let me know what you see in the chat box. I'll just pause there for a few moments.
Right now, we have compassion and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Kindness, resilience.
Nice. That's good. That's interesting that that's what you're taking away from that. Awesome. Anything else coming up in there?
Flexibility, and then resilience again.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
Empathy, flexibility. So I think you'll see that in what I'm going to add to your observation in the 3 themes. The number 1, leaders invested in themselves to be able to do those 9 things. They invested in themselves to be resilient, to find and figure out how to use empathy, to add to that toolkit, to change their business. It's because they invested in themselves. So hear me, make no mistake. There is no other more critical business imperative than that. Full stop, 100%, and a mic drop. Leaders invested in themselves. That's why that all worked. And I love the connection that you made in the chat box around resilience and kindness. And I even think they invested in themselves to figure out how to be kind with themselves. 100% mic drop. No leader in any profession, whether it's sports or in the arts, stops strengthening themselves, stops getting better. That doesn't exist. These professionals always carve out dedicated, protective, sacred time to work on themselves. They engage professionals in how to do that, and they engage with others. There's no leader in any profession who doesn't do that. So my question to a leader is, why would you stop? All of these really do link really, really tight together. And one of the things to think about that I'll offer to you, and we've got a polling question here coming up. So my question to you, we went through this quickly: business results, your team interaction, changing anything ineffective or creating new patterns with team. And team, if you're a solopreneur, could involve any of your suppliers, clients, peers that you worked with, and that inner work. So here's a polling question now for you. I'm going to ask you two. The first one, everyone, is which one of these areas did you focus on in the start of the pandemic? So flashback a year ago, if you don't mind. Um, did you focus right away on business results? Did you focus on how you're going to work and improve work with team, who your team were? Or did you focus on really that stamina for yourself and your inner work? So I'm just curious, if there's more than one, please pick it. So which one at the beginning of the pandemic, reflecting now, you really focused on? So jump into that poll and let's see. At the start of the pandemic, which did you focus most of your energy on? Look at that. Wow. Half of you inner work. I'm curious what that says. So you really focused on whatever was going on inside to give yourself the strength or awareness going forward. Wow. Okay. So that's powerful. That's amazing. We're going to close that, Lola, and go to the last of the polling question. Which one now requires more of your focus now going forward? It could be the same or different. So which one or ones do you think now, going into year 2 of this, is going to need more of your focus? Okay, so more on team interactions. So if I was talking with you in person, I'd ask you to tell me more about that. What is it you want to do more of, less of? What are you thinking of in terms of your team? But still a tie, still maintaining the inner work and a bit on business, but really focusing on team. Well, let's talk about what options that there have and how you could really focus more on team. So invest in your leadership. So ways to put on your oxygen mask. And I would think some of you are already doing this, but let's look at the options. Work with an executive coach. Join a peer-to-peer advisory group. Work with a leadership teams coach. Interesting, if you want to work on your team interactions, this may be an area that you want to learn a little bit more about. Enroll in a new course or a program. There's a lot of them that are very successfully doing this online. And if budget is really slim, read or review some thought leaders, podcasts, webinars, TED Talks, Harvard Business Review. There's a lot that you can do without having a budget or paying for it. And try to find ways that allow you to engage so you can do your own reflection and learn from other people. So I just want to really go back to my key finding that it's a business imperative. So it's not a budget item or a time item to cut. If you don't grow you, then who is there for your team, for your company, and for your organization? You have to do something. And a lot of these things on here, I do. It's how I work with people. This isn't a self-serving comment for me to make. There's lots of options here that you can find. Peer-to-peer advisory groups. We know Tech Canada is here locally. Working with an executive and a teams coach. Going into the ICF website, looking up and maybe interviewing some different coaches could be a good fit for you. There's a lot. And ask other people in your network what they've done and have conversations about how did you put on your oxygen mask? What's coming up for you? What else could be relevant? So without a doubt, leadership and learning, they go hand in hand forever. And it comes in all aspects of the business, the inner work, and the team interaction. Those are all areas of learning lockstep in your leadership role. Here is a takeaway that you could think about I've taken what I shared with you in those 3 columns, just put it here in a different format. Some of the leaders I work with, we actually map this out over time and then we monitor it. What is the goal for the business or the team or team or inner interaction? How are you going to measure success? What's the time frame you're going to focus on this? What are the support and the resources that you need to do it? And probably the most important column on this are what are potential barriers, things that are going to get in your way, because there will be some. So identify it now and put a plan of action into that. And before we go into some questions, I just want to share a personal reflection. I'm offering this to you in the spirit of sharing. So some gentle reminders, or what I'll say, kind of like a punch in the face reminder from people in your corner. Don't put pressure on yourself to be in a high all of the time. Your clients need to know that you are human and this virus affects you as well. You are not alone with your feelings. We are all in this together and we have to support one another. That's my mom. She's never wrong. She sent this to me in a text one night and I've kept it with me ever since. I didn't even know that she felt I needed to hear this until she sent this. And the other one is, Linda, what's the learning here? Connie was my mentor since university. And I used to be so frustrated when she'd ask me that question at the time, but it always got me to an outcome. It always got me to a result that was really helpful. And even now, I'll hear her and I'll ask myself, what's the learning here, Linda? Or I'll often say to the leaders that I'm coaching, something might come up and I'll just say, hey, Thomas, what's the learning here? What's the takeaway? And we're here to learn. And look at the last year as that. It was the learning. If there's any one question to ask yourself is, gee, Sherry, what's the learning here? So I want to pause here. I would like to see if there's any questions in the chat box. And Lola, chat box or Q&A box, what would be most useful right now? I'll take your advice on that.
Q&A box. Q&A box would be
Q&A?
most useful. If anybody has any
Awesome.
questions, they can place it in there.
Okay, so 2 things. If you've got any questions, please put it in the Q&A box. And if you don't have a question and you're willing to, I'd love you to share what's your key action item or a key takeaway from this session today. So let's just take a dive, and sharing that is helpful for everybody. We could all see what you're taking away or thinking of, or any questions. So in the Q&A box. And there might not be any, but I'll pause for a few minutes and see if you have anything that you want to share or anything that you'd like to ask. Oh, that's a good suggestion. Thanks. You see that, Lola?
What did I say?
Yeah, make the chat live so everyone can see the comments. Yeah, good point. If I hadn't have said some of that out loud. Oh, here's a question. What inspired you the most throughout my journey? Ooh, that's a zinger. What inspired me most through my journey? I was, so going into this, I was very clear on my role and what I do for a living. And I put that at the beginning of this presentation, that I'm there to help the personal growth of leaders and that of their organizations. So what inspired me was to stick to my plan, stick to my mission, stick to what I know I do well and I'm good at, and how can I help? So that really, really inspired me to keep doing what I know is working and where I'm of best service right now. And that is with leaders. Quite often my work is behind the scenes. I don't often share who I work with. That's just how I'm wired. But a lot of people, they may say that, but I was really clear on who I serve and what my role was and what I was good at. And that was motivating to know it was needed. So yeah, good question. Thank you. Well, feel free to reach out if there's anything that I can do for you that you've thought of maybe after from this presentation. Please do reach out, and would love to follow up and connect with you a little bit more.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. It was very engaging, and I bet everyone in attendance also really enjoyed it. So we really appreciate you for volunteering your time today. And also thank you to everyone in attendance for joining us today. Don't forget to check our events page at west.ca to register for our upcoming webinars. If there are no more questions, I will now end the webinar. Oh, I think there's one more question. Oh, it just says good presentation.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Sherry. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for jumping in and participating. And thanks, Lola.
Of course. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. Bye.